David, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Congratulations, you are the latest any guest has ever been in the history of this podcast.
Excellent, excellent. First at something. It's been so long. Do I get a chocolate watch?
You do. It's funny because I spent a lot of the morning watching you on these high performance podcasts talking about, if your deadline is 4 o'clock on Friday, you meet it. And, kind of meticulous type A personality. And I remember
I,
thinking, I thought to myself, this guy's going to be on time. I better get down there and get ready.
yeah, look, you're absolutely right. But here's the actual facts of the scenario. I set off from my home in Monte Carlo at 8:30 this morning, making my way to Twynham, which is the metropolis that I grew up in the southwest of Scotland. Flight delayed. Edinburgh Airport was like a zoo. Traffic on M8, A75, brutal. And signal in this part of the world is so bad, I couldn't commit to stopping and relying on any of the G's on my phone. So I committed to get all the way to the family house where I could get some broadband Wi Fi to make this the best interview possible. So there's all my excuses.
Accepted. How are you at this stage in your life dealing with those delays and just the general frustrations of life?
I'm okay about accepting things beyond my control. So, the aircraft air bridge having a problem and then missing the flight slot and all of that sort of stuff. And then, some of the aircraft on the stand in Edinburgh, so we had to wait 20 minutes. I just accept that because it's beyond my control. People walking slowly in the middle of corridors and stuff like that, I don't understand. Where are people not trying to get to? What is this meandering through places like, the holiday doesn't start in the airport. The holiday starts when you get to your destination. Hurry up, people, and get out of my way. That frustrates me.
And what about the logic that it doesn't matter how fast I walk to the gate, I'm leaving at the same time?
I'm not talking about getting on the plane. I'm
Oh,
talking about getting off the plane through passport control.
right.
And then the friendly people at Edinburgh Airport had us go through, I would say, 15 laps of zigzag with nobody in, because I was one of the first to get there. But I've been sent back before for cutting under the Tensa barriers. So I diligently did my 15 zigzag, looking at a passport official giggling to himself, probably thinking that's, looking at Egypt going up and down, up and down. There's a lot of things in life I just don't understand that is so inefficient that we could make better just with a wee bit of effort.
Yeah. Yeah. I'd say your family find you interesting sometimes at dinner, do they?
No,
Jesus,
I'm,
shut up.
shut up. Exactly. No, my mother has often said, David, we don't need another lecture. And then I go on to lecture on why I'm not lecturing. But I'm just passionate. I'm passionate about things.
Well, I saw you had a good line earlier where you said, everyday life is geared towards mediocrity. Formula One is geared towards the exceptional. And I dare say for you, that exceptional environment is like a soothing balm. Surrounded by it is like this. These are my people.
What a beautiful expression. I'm going to borrow that. I hope you don't mind and make it my own. It's a soothing balm. It is. Being around people that have a can-do attitude, it seems so obvious. Very few people within the Formula One community and motor racing as a whole, actually, 'cause there's so many brilliant racing championships, whether it's club racing level or rallying or whatever it is, where you ask someone the question about can this be done, very, very, very rarely will anyone ever start the sentence by going, well, the problem is. Very, very, very often they'll start with, give me a moment. Yes, let me think about it. Oh, I think, it's something of a positive nature. It's just the way they're wired. Surround yourself with positive people. It doesn't have to be Formula One. It really doesn't. And I was reflecting on it as I was trying not to speed to get here to be not the latest person that's ever been on your podcast. And I was convinced could there are police float around the A75 where the family village is. But anyway, I managed to get here respecting the speed limit. But I was reflecting on my parents. We have a transport yard, a transport company that my dad inherited, my brother now runs, and the whole attitude of the family, it was all hands on deck. Everybody had a role to play. There was no excuses, and their work ethic has engaged into myself, into my brother. Our sister's no longer with us, but she was of a similar vein, and I think it just seems like a logical place to live. Could you get stuff done? It doesn't mean you get everything you want, but what I always tell my 16-year-old son, he'll get almost everything he works for. He'll not get everything he wants, but he'll get almost anything he works for. Seems logical, no?
I am a couple of years ago. Just now that you say that, Rory McIlroy of all people was doing a podcast about Succession, the TV show. I don't know if you've watched that at all.
Yeah.
Uh, and he was asked, "What are your takeaways on the show?" And his main takeaway was, "How do I not let my child turn into those adults?" And so you grew up in a normal environment, and your son grew up in an extraordinary environment. The money, you know.
Yeah.
How do you prevent him not becoming one of the Roy children?
Great question. And I'm sure, well, I know for one thing, with the greatest respect to my mother and the generation of which I grew up, but one of her expressions when I was a youngster would be, "Come here so I can hit you." And I never had to go there so she could hit me because I'd done nothing wrong. It wasn't a sport for her, it's because I'd done something wrong. So those are words that my son's never heard because, of course, the generation he's grown up in, you take their mobile phone off them, or whatever. But look, I don't give him pocket money. He has to do stuff to then get some money to go and do something. He doesn't automatically get pocket money each week, which some may feel that's my Scottishness coming through. But I got £1 a week when I was a boy. But I did my chores around the household. Now he's not doing chores around the household in the same way that I did, but he's got other things to do, like washing the car or whatever it happens to be, and then he'll get some money. So look, is he being brought up in the same environment? No, he's not. He's grown up in Monaco. He's 16. He's got a wee electric car because you can have an electric car when you're 15 there. He's done over 3,500 kilometers in it. Which I think will prepare him to be a better road car driver when he's 17 and eventually gets a proper car. But these are all benefits of being in a more fortunate environment. But I can only hope that the work ethic I have, and he sees me going off to work, and he sees the hours that I put in. I didn't retire and go and sit on a sun lounger in Monaco. I was part of founding a production company. I'm a shareholder in an events company. I travel to a lot of Grand Prix. I do events. I'm hardwired
Yeah.
to work because we were brought up to work, and then at the end of the working day, you put your feet up and go, that was a good day.
Yes. So, I mean, you have talked about being meticulous from a young age when it came to your karting, into your driving, small things. I saw you talking to Jake Humphrey recently. Like you would clean out your bag, every time as a kid and have it pristine and everything ready to go. And that was just your way. And I suspect that personality type continued right the way through to your peak as a Formula One driver. And yet, by the same token, we always debate nature versus nurture. I've also heard you talk like with great confidence that when you talk about the greats that you came up against and you interacted with, they just had something that nature gave them, and it's just hard to bridge that gap. That there is a genius or whatever word you want to use when it comes to a Schumacher or a Senna or whoever you want to mention, and you can't put it into someone, and you're fairly sure of that based on your experiences at the elite level.
I am, because I retired after 15 seasons in Formula One, completely calm in my mind, completely convinced that I tried everything. Sports psychologist, having my brain waves monitored to understand how to control alpha wave, beta wave, how to be in the most receptive way to visualize or to deploy the talents that I had. So I believe that I absolutely wrung the sponge dry of the talent that nature gave me. I was given a huge opportunity by my family and a huge commitment by my family to develop that talent. And then that carried me to a point where the sport as a whole said, we believe in your talent, and we believe in you as an asset, as part of a racing team. And the fact that I spent 9 years in McLaren under Ron Dennis, who was not the soft and cuddly type, he didn't suffer fools. And I'm not saying that to say I haven't done some foolish things in my time, but I had a work ethic. It made it very difficult for him, despite sometimes not getting the results that the car deserved. It was difficult for him to replace me because I turned up and worked hard with the engineers, the mechanics, did the testing, and then Mika had, and this is part of what we'll discuss when Mika and I are doing the tour. Mika had that God-given extra whatever it is that meant he didn't have to work as hard, and he was a two-time world champion. Now, arguably, had he worked as hard as Michael, who undoubtedly worked incredibly hard, physically, mentally, he had a real need to take the talent he had to extreme levels and arguably pushed sporting boundaries beyond what would be considered the norm at that time. Humble background, and that's where it's quite interesting in comparison to an Ayrton who came from a more, let's say, wealthy background, but he absolutely had a talent and absolutely had a need to fight for every scrap of anything on the table. And it's so fascinating to see how that natural talent the levels they could reach. Now, if I can be so bold to say that I could dance with them very occasionally on the same level, which is the moments when I beat them, where they were beside me on the podium, but they could just do it week in, week out. And when you mentioned Rory, clearly an incredible talent who's got work ethic and he's got his own particular way of prepping and going about his business. But it's not just because the water he grew up with it was purer for his soul, or because he's spending more time in the gym or on the simulator. He's got a talent and he's exploited that talent, and he's got a hunger and a need and a desire to leave nothing on the
Yeah.
green.
And it's probably a hard thing to articulate, but and there'll be lots of F1 fans who can appreciate the technicalities of the sport. So be as nerdy as you like. Are there certain things in your driving armory, certain bends, certain moments where the gap would crystallize for you that, geez, I know Schumacher takes that a touch differently, or is it hard to articulate?
No, well, in Schumacher's terms, yes, because I didn't physically drive the same car as Michael, but Mika, who
Yeah.
won two world championships, against Michael at a winning period of Michael's career as well, you can see it on the data, and therefore, just in very simple racing terms, uh, we break a racetrack up into slow, medium, and fast. Of course, it's varying speeds from the moment you leave the pit lane, but in simple terms, we classify slow, medium, and fast. Slow speed, big stops from 200 miles an hour down to a 40-mile-an-hour corner. I could match Mika, beat Mika. It was difficult for him to match me there. For whatever reason, I had a real sense of high speed down to low speed, feeling the grip, balancing the car, the engine braking, and everything. High speed, it really depended on the day, but largely speaking, there was no difference between us at high speed, because that's just a trust and belief. You're going through corners faster than your belief system would normally tell you in terms of driving, because you're dealing with downforce, and the downforce is the square of the speed. So if you can go a little bit faster, you get multiples of extra downforce, which makes the car capable of going through the corner at 180 miles an hour. It's mind blowing, really, but that's a trust system that you have in the car and your engineers. Medium speed, where you're transitioning between, you don't have that much load in terms of downforce. Imagine flying a kite with not so much wind. It's quite difficult to keep the kite up. Imagine an aircraft, therefore, at low velocity. It becomes more difficult to control. A Grand Prix car in medium speed corner is more difficult to judge where the downforce is and where the balance is. And that, to me, is where Mika was better than me. And that's where I assume Michael was exceptional as well.
Okay.
And so there's my summary. I don't know if that was easy enough to understand, but
It's
that's how
fascinating.
it broke
No,
down.
no, that's really, it's fascinating. Great answer. On Mika, and again, I suspect all the petrol heads here will be fascinated to watch the dynamic between the two of you, because obviously Formula One types are weird people, you know, drivers. They're stone cold killers. They're often loners. They are absolutely type A's. They are egotistical, etc. You could go on forever, I'm sure. And so you two, as teammates and also competitors, that is something for Ron Dennis to try and balance. And I suppose a perfect example of how that can go awry is around 1999 territory, Belgian Grand Prix. You're both going into the first corner together. You touch afterwards, he won't talk to you on the podium. I've heard you say his engineer Mark Slade said to you afterwards, well, if we lose the championship, it's your fault, pal. And it gets to a point where you two, you know, you're together and you're going to the airport and you're going to the same track, but you're traveling separately. So this notion of teammates in Formula One is always kind of a curious one. Might be the wrong word, I think, sometimes, teammates.
100%. It's a misnomer. He's not your mate. He's your biggest rival. He is the person that your success is his failure, and vice versa. And you take pleasure in their failure. It's as simple as that, because it leads and builds. You're hoping that it psychologically creates a problem for them that will give you an edge. So it's in that respect, any sports man or woman or any sports person will completely understand that you cannot feel pleasure in someone else's success when you're trying to beat them. You can admire them, you can shake their hand and show your sporting respect.
Hmm.
But if you're happy for your competitor to beat you, you're not wired right. You're not wired right. So, it's a very volatile relationship to
Yeah.
manage, and it's one of the most difficult roles for the team principal. Whether it was Ron Dennis for Alain Prost and Ayrton Senna, Nigel Mansell and Nelson Piquet under Frank Williams, um, Nico Rosberg and Lewis Hamilton at Mercedes. These are difficult situations, which inevitably we will see boil over at McLaren as well
Yeah.
with Lando and Oscar. We've seen little signs of it, but they are not. One of those guys will be world champion this year, and it might be the only chance they get. Next year's McLaren might not be any good.
Hmm.
It's a completely different sport next year. It's still called Formula One, but this could be their one chance.
Very intense, though. I like that is not a working environment that sounds appealing in any way.
It's awesome because what it does is it brings out the best in you.
Okay.
It brings out your best. And I think that people have so much potential. And again, when I drove past the village to come to the family house to talk to you, and I was with my fiance, and it's been quite a long day to get here of frustration.
Yeah.
And I said to her, I said, how the hell did I ever come from this beautiful part of the world, but so inaccessible in many respects, and so unconnected with Formula One motor racing? How did I ever come from here to being 15 years in Formula One? And of course, the truth is because of a desire, a need, a hunger, a support system, a belief system. When I was 14, my father told me that when I get to Formula One, that I should, if I'm lucky, I'll have a 10-year career. Now, my dad's not Lawrence Stroll. We've got a comfortable background, but he didn't own a Formula One team. He just had an absolute belief that he could see in me a commitment. I was winning at a certain level. So all of those little building blocks of people around you are what lead you down a path. And then once you're on the path, it's down to the individual. And I have this conversation with my 16-year-old who's racing in GB4.
Yeah.
I can create all the opportunities, but he has his hands on the steering wheel. The decisions lie with him. I cannot be in the car. And frankly, at 54, I shouldn't be in the car. He should be better. Every generation should be better. And therefore, he either succeeds or fails based on his commitment and his talent.
Did you ever lose your nerve in a car, like with regard to your own personal safety?
Never. And this I find fascinating. And thank you for asking that question, because basically, if you and I were walking down a dark street in a dodgy city, and things were looking maybe slightly uncomfortable, you would feel my breath on the back of your neck, and I would naturally just drop behind you. I've never fought in my life. I've been punched once by the school bully when I was at secondary school. It was just my turn. It was my day for him to punch me, and I didn't punch back. I'm scared of the dark. I don't like heights. But see, in a racing car, the more difficult it got, I knew someone was going to back off, and that was my opportunity. I had a need, I had an absolute need to want to exploit every opportunity. And I was never ever scared in a racing car.
Mm.
I was scared of coming home late with my ex-wife when I told her I'd be home a couple hours earlier. You know, things like that scared me, but not driving a Grand Prix car.
And how do you explain that?
Because I felt in control. I
Yeah.
felt that I had been born to race. I'd been racing since I was 11 years old. I'd grown up around racetracks as a kid. Before that, racing was my environment, and it was where I felt comfortable. And there's a throttle, a brake, and a steering that goes right or left. You're in control of each of those items. Now, that doesn't mean occasionally you don't go beyond the limits of the car, or you aquaplane in the wet and crash, or you have a car failure. But you just have a belief. You have a belief that you will get to the limit
Right.
of that car, and therefore you're so focused with exploiting the potential that you're not thinking about the what ifs. The what could it, can I be hurt? Can I be killed? And
Yeah.
I had a big crash in '95 in testing at Silverstone. I was knocked out, slipped my helmet. This was pre hands, pre halos, pre
Mm.
soft padding at the side of the car, and I hit the chassis. And when I came round, I woke up and didn't quite know exactly where I was and exactly what time it was. And obviously, quickly you start to realize you're testing at Silverstone. You've survived a crash. You have no major injuries. And I tried to share that with my mother to explain that if I'm ever killed in a Grand Prix and it's on television, like we saw Ayrton be killed, like we saw Roland Ratzenberger be killed, then I didn't want her to think my last moments of life were filled with fear and regret. My last moments up until being knocked out were filled with how do I minimize the point of impact or the angle of impact to minimize the damage, so therefore the mechanics can rebuild the car quickly so I can be testing later in the day. We're wired
Mm.
how to crash because
Mm.
we crash from when we're, now they're racing at 8. You learn that if you can go in with just one corner of the car, then that's one corner that needs to be replaced. If you go in spinning around and take all 4 corners off, quite clearly that takes longer to fix. It's more expensive. And so the moments up until being knocked out, and in my mind, being knocked out is like dying, but the difference is you wake up. You don't know you're knocked out when you're knocked out. A boxer, when he goes sparkled on the canvas, doesn't know he's knocked out, but he knows he's been knocked out when his eyes open and he's seeing little birdies flying around, and he's no longer able, he doesn't make the
Yeah.
count.
Wow. I saw you talking recently about an eating disorder when you were growing up, which is not shocking, really, when you think of how prevalent it must be amongst jockeys, for instance.
Sure.
Weight slows you down. You were tall, didn't want the weight. It's almost a natural consequence. Is it a common thing, do you suspect, amongst your contemporaries, or do you know?
I've never asked the question, but that is a good question. I suspect it must be on the taller drivers. But that said, my generation, you started racing at 11 and you were in a class from 11 to 16-year-olds. So I was racing against guys that were men. They were shaving, they were muscly. I was a skinny wee 11-year-old, and then I shot up, and then the weight that was there as a minimum for the driver and the cart didn't accommodate the taller guys, and the little guys had a huge amount of ballast on the cart, lead blocks strapped everywhere, which is why, as things have evolved, now you've got different categories: 8 until 10, 10 until 12, 14 to 16. It's much more sensibly spread
Yeah.
to take that away. But without anybody saying you must do this. I just knew, I instinctively knew, because I had hunger and desire, that I needed to make weight. So when I was sort of 14, 15, I'm tall, I'm now got no lead on the cart, and that's performance. So I weighed myself morning and night. I averaged out my weight. I made sure I was on weight. That was at the expense of calories. If I was overweight, what I'd eaten. And without any pressure from anybody else, I just naturally was weighing myself twice a
Yeah.
day, averaging out the weight, making sure that when I arrived at the race weekend, I had just enough energy to do my job. And as soon as I went to cars, then that became, let's say, less of an issue. And then there was a minimum weight, so I could be up to 75 kilos when I was with my helmet and everything as a Grand Prix driver. I won't say it was easy.
Hmm.
You look at me back then, I was definitely, ripped. And I was an athlete, and I trained as an athlete, and all the rest of it. I'm a full 10 kilos heavier, but I'm also 54, and I don't go to the gym. If you see me in the gym, it's because I'm borrowing the water long term or borrowing an apple.
Hmm.
But I keep, reasonably healthy through everyday life and all the rest of it.
I saw you saw it was fascinating. I just saw a clip. You were talking to Eddie Jordan, in fact, who we should mention before the end of our conversation. But you were telling him that the average person, because we've all sort of wondered, the average person, let alone just not crashing the thing, which would probably disqualify us early, but just physically being generous, you think the average citizen would last 10 laps in the car physically?
And that's being incredibly kind. And when I say the average person, that includes me nowadays. I was it 2 years ago, did a filming for a little feature where we were at Imola, San Marino, and I went around the track in RB7, which would have been the Sebastian Vettel V8 World Championship car. And I did one timed lap on a track that I've won the Grand Prix in 98 or 99.
Hmm.
And then Max jumped in the car, Max Verstappen, and he did one flying lap. And I was 5 seconds slower. Now, I was actually reasonably happy with that because I hadn't been round Imola for, I don't know, more than a decade or more. And I don't drive, I haven't driven Grand Prix cars at that time for probably, I'd done demonstrations
Yeah.
and I do donuts, but not pushing on a racetrack for well over a decade. So that just puts in perspective get what it is to be at the peak of your game, and it'd be like putting Bjorn Borg on court with Djokovic or something. Would he even win a point? Highly unlikely. That the sport just moves on.
Hmm.
Physically, you know, I've lost more than 2 inches in neck girth, and that's including the fact that I've got neck fat as a 54-year-old. So that's just muscle. You look at the drivers, the necks come from their jaws, and mine used to, and I've got quite a wide jaw because you're supporting all that G and weight on your head. So it's an extreme environment. It's uncomfortable.
Hmm.
It's fantastically uncomfortable. It's addictively uncomfortable when you're in the space of trying to win Grand Prix. But see, when you retire and you know that your time is done, and I was lucky enough to retire on my own terms rather than, being kicked out of the sport.
Hmm.
I didn't do any exercise for a year. And it was such a joy not to have neck pain, back pain, arm pain,
Right.
head hurting because of the vibrations, your ears ringing because of the noise. It's such a hostile environment, but all of those things that I had become, allergic to at the end of my career, they were addictive at the time because I was like, I can take more of this pain than my competitor. That pain's going to make him stop. I'm not stopping.
Wow. Um, for a small country like this, anytime any of our fellow people do things on the international stage, I think we get very immersed in it, and it's fun to follow. And there was a time, obviously, where Eddie Jordan was this like electric presence. Just of the tapestry of people doing things out there. He was, it was kind of rock and roll, and it was fun, and whatever adjective you want to throw about Eddie. You guys obviously were doing the podcast together. I know it was on your podcast Eddie first revealed his illness publicly. So and with the punditry, you spent a lot of time with him. So it's just so sad. He's just like someone that vibrant. It's hard to think of them no more.
Totally agree. And I even today I'm kind of struggling to come to terms with that he passed so quickly. I obviously knew about the illness before he chose to share it on the show, and it all happened so quickly. And I had such a belief that if anyone was going to beat it or prolong his time here, it was going to be Eddie. But it shows that, what a cruel illness it is. And I got the chance to tell him, just how much I loved and respected him, because most of the time I was telling him how much it annoyed me and frustrated me, and you could never keep him on script, which is brilliant because then you got better material. And I was the straight guy, and very comfortable staying in lane, and EJ didn't understand what a lane was. He was, but that made it so exciting because you didn't know where you were going in any conversation. And I don't think he knew where he was going in any conversation,
Mm.
but he was the life and soul of any environment, any party. And when he passed, the last of his kind, I think, has left us. I do not believe there will be an entrepreneurial Grand Prix team owner like Eddie ever again. I think this in so many sport has changed in so many different ways now that he could call out Toto Wolff, Christian Horner, Stefano Domenicali, Gunter Steiner when he was there. He could call them out, and they had nothing but either an answer for him or a nervous laugh. Whereas any other individual within the Formula One community would call them out, they would put them on their list of, I'm not talking, tell the press officer they're not talking
Right.
to them, just snub them, smother them, do what people in positions of power can do when they
Mm.
don't like the question. They couldn't do it to Eddie because there was always that understanding that he'd been there and done it in tougher times than they had.
Yes.
And it's not to take away from the incredible success of Toto, Christian, and these guys, because they're inspirational leaders, but they hadn't literally remortgaged the home, sent the bailiffs around the back
Yeah.
door
Yeah.
and done all of that to get to where they got to. Eddie was an incredible individual, and yeah, he's no longer with us, which
Yeah.
is
Must be tough for you to
tough.
think of doing the show without him.
The show is done. He was the show.
Right.
We haven't recorded anything um, since. There won't be another FFS. We did 100 shows, and he was the show. So that I think they're not. Some of them are obviously in that moment in time, relating to a particular weekend or a particular Grand Prix or something like that. But a lot of them are actually just life lesson discussion. Some of the guests on there had nothing to do with Formula One. They might be fans of it, but Eddie was able to transcend so many different sports and get so many interesting people along. It was really discussions amongst people from different sports and business,
Mm.
their journey, some how they got to where they were in their journey, or some of the fun things they did with Eddie along the way. And yeah, just it was a pleasure to do them. It was a pain to get into them because EJ was, it was like, yeah, he was just he was loose, but he was brilliant.
Mm. Feel free to do a hard pass on this if you don't know much about Alex Dunn. Do you know a bit about Alex Dunn? You were
Yep,
okay.
I know he's the real deal. I know that he's super impressive. I know that he's caught the attention, obviously not only of McLaren, of which he's part of their
Yeah.
program, but other people within the sport have sat up and really, he's got an edge to him. Let's say, I was almost going to say wildness, but that's not the right word. And I wasn't taught to speak properly when I was a child, so I'm limited in my vocabulary. But he's got an edge, which is exciting, and he deserves a place in Formula One.
Okay. Wow. Because people here are very familiar with him, following him closely. Fifth in F2 at the moment, one in Bahrain and Imola. And then I suppose at the Austrian Grand Prix, where he filled in for Lando Norris in the first practice, he was just a tenth off Oscar Piastri. And that's a big sign, I presume. That's 19 years old doing that, as you said, ready for F1, F1 worthy.
Yeah, yep.
Wow.
You've
Great.
summed it up nicely.
Great.
You get one opportunity in Formula One very often to make an impression, and he made an impression.
Wow. Um, you've had a long day. And I think it's time you went and just lay down, had a cup of tea, and relaxed. I presume you and Mika Hakkinen, without the rivalry, are in a friendly space now, and you'll have a good time at the convention centre in Dublin, or what is the relationship?
Relationship's great.
Right.
The anger, frustration, feeling of hatred, which I always feel so guilty using the hate word,
Yeah, sure.
because it should normally be reserved for the most extreme people. But there was moments where I couldn't stand him. I couldn't, he was infuriating, and there was moments I know where he couldn't stand me, and he couldn't understand, and that's what's so fascinating now as grown-ups away from the sport, when we share and discuss and reminisce, is to see, how difficult he found me to work with, because as you can tell, I'm just an absolute joy and full of turn up with chocolates and roses, and how difficult and frustrating I found him. But it was because we both had a need and a desire and an understanding that we needed to beat the other guy, and we needed to break the other guy if we could. And that to many people who are not involved in sport, they may find uncomfortable, but actually it's about bringing the best out in yourself. And as much as I just spoke about Eddie as being someone that, you could have love and frustration in equal measures, it's because he pushed boundaries, and he made you have to be on your A game, and he made you have to be better. And Mika, as teammate, was exactly that. And most people don't live in environments where they have to be better. They just have to be themselves. And being yourself is great. It's wonderful. There's a lot of wonderful people out there doing great things. But maybe because of the career they have or the environment they're in, they just don't realize how much more their potential is, because they're not being frustratingly challenged and pushed. And that's what a teammate in Formula One does. So Mika and I can now look each other in the eye. It's very difficult to look a man in the eye. Maybe it's very difficult to look a woman in an eye, as a competitor. I've only had Susie Wolff as a competitor when we were teammates in DTM, but we never actually sort of had any comings together on track. But it's very difficult to look someone in the eye that isn't a loved one. You know what I mean? You
Yeah.
you can look someone that you love to their core in the eye, and it's not awkward. I can look Mika in the eye because we have been through a roller coaster of emotions together, and I know I've got nothing. There's nothing more for me to try and hide from him. There's
Mm,
nothing more for him to try and hide from me.
mm,
It's just respect,
mm.
and it doesn't mean that we agree on stuff that we disagreed with 20 years ago, because we'll forever hold our ground on whether he was wrong and I was wrong. And if he could only see it my way, then his life would be free. But that's part of being competitive.
Wow, there's such an intimacy in that kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, yeah.
Yes.
Wow. Well, like I mentioned at the top, people can get tickets at Ticketmaster, and it's on Saturday, the 27th of September at the Convention Centre. Listen, in all seriousness, what a pain in the arse kind of a day. So we appreciate you coming on and being so giving and brilliant to chat to you, David Coulthard. All the best and enjoy the event in Dublin. Take care.
Thank you.